Welcome back to Media with Magic. I'm coming to you first with an apology and an explanation. I promised the sequel to The Wicker Man, The Wicker Tree, and I have the notes finished for the movie. However, the movie was adapted from a novel, and because I'm seeing some plot holes in this title, I wanted to order a copy of the book to read in order to round out my understanding of the writer and director's intentions. Unfortunately, circumstances prevented my copy from getting to me. Therefore, I think I will postpone the film until another time. Today I want to take a baby step away from movies that directly reference pagan lifestyles and tackle something a little more mainstream, but a bit witchy in its own way. Jim Henson's 1986 film, Labyrinth, starring Jennifer Connelly and David Bowie. This review will take a slightly different turn from the Wicker Man review, largely in that the content doesn't directly reference paganism or Wicca or anything of that sort. The only thing immediately tying this movie to the theme is its involvement of fair folk, goblins, and similar preternatural creatures, based on Brian Froud's beautiful artwork. While I'll address some of that briefly, I'll largely address major correspondences found within the film, as well as themes that are applicable to us. If you've never seen Labyrinth before, then I highly recommend you put this review on hold and go find it. You can even rent it to stream here on YouTube if you're so inclined. The novelization went out of print for years, but can be purchased hardcover online, something I highly recommend, because once again, many important elements of the story wound up not making it into the movie, which I'll discuss at greater length during the summary and when we get to themes. There are transcribed versions online still, I think, but you may have to do some digging. As always, I remind you to keep these reviews contain spoilers pretty much from here on out. The film begins with our main character, teenage Sarah, reenacting a scene from a play at her local park. She's dressed in a flowing white dress with flowers in her hair, and the character she plays monologues to a barn owl nearby, entreating an imaginary goblin king to return a stolen child. She struggles with the lines, and only when she opens her book to remind herself will be made aware that she is not who she is pretending to be. She realizes she is late returning home and runs there in the rain. At home, her father and stepmother are awaiting her to return and babysit her infant brother Toby while they go on date night. Sarah's contentious about this, and one of the first things you'll notice about her is that she whines a lot. Whether or not you identify her will largely depend on your age at the time of viewing this. This is better explained in the book, that she gets her theatrical attitude from her mother, a well-known thespian whom she idolizes but does not live with. However, if you're watching the movie, you might be wondering why she's accusing a colicky 2-year-old of sneaking into her room, climbing her bookshelves, and stealing a teddy bear, when it's obvious her father or stepmother had to have done it. A storm rages outside as she begs no one in particular to whisk her away from her circumstances. She grows increasingly fed up with Toby's crying and seems to think yelling at him will encourage him to do anything other than yell in response. She starts to slip back into her play again, saying that if the Goblin King therein were real, she might summon him to take Toby off her hands, because babies totally understand literature. Unknown to her, there's a pile of actual goblins hiding in Toby's toy box, waiting for her to explicitly wish for them to take him. She repeats some rhyme from the play that doesn't seem to work. They need her to say, specifically, "I wish the goblins would come and take you away right now," which she finally does, out of frustration. When she gives up, puts Toby back in his crib, and leaves him in the dark to cry himself to sleep. And it works instantaneously. In a tense moment, Sarah is drawn back to Toby's room when he's suddenly very quiet, and she finds the crib empty. In the dark, things move around just out of her field of vision, and a barn owl beats its wings frantically at the window, eventually forcing its way in. The owl briefly attacks her before transforming, revealing itself to be Jareth, the Goblin King, played by the late David Bowie. She understands what he is immediately and begs him to bring the baby back, but he insists that what's said is said. He advises her to go back to her room and forget about the baby, tries to placate her with gifts, even direct threats when he throws a snake at her, but she insists she must have Toby back. Seeing that she will not be swayed, Jareth offers her a deal, transporting her to his world, standing on the outskirts of a massive maze at the center of which is a city and his castle. He says that if she can get to the center in 13 hours, then her brother is hers to take. If she fails, her brother will eventually forget his sister, his parents, his humanity, and turn into a goblin, a fate that in the book is implied to be the source of all the goblins in Jareth's kingdom. He warns her to turn back before it is too late, and Sarah resolves to move forward. Jareth leaves her, and she finds a way into the labyrinth on meeting a dwarf named Hoggle, who of course won't tell her how to get inside until she asks the right question. Words and their importance remain a running theme throughout this film, which we'll discuss later. There are several moments in the ensuing scenes where Sarah takes what she can see of the labyrinth for granted, and when it doesn't pan out for her, she gets frustrated and comes close to giving up. Creatures appear in the labyrinth to help her or deceive her early on, and often their messages for her are misinterpreted because she continues to fail to ask the right questions or fully listen to what people are telling her. At the very beginning, she's given directions by a worm living just inside the outer wall of the labyrinth. As she begins to carry on her way, he specifies she can't go in a specific direction. Rather than ask him why, she takes what he said for what it is and goes on the other route. When she is gone, he says to no one, meaning us, the audience, that if she had taken the other path, she would have gone straight to the castle, and we just can't have that. Eventually, Sarah finds the paths she takes are changing behind her, until at last she winds up facing a common test seen in many questing stories. A set of guards stand before two doors, one leading to the castle and the other to a certain death. She's told that she can ask questions of just one of them, but one guard is honest and the other lies. They won't say which, and she has to figure it out for herself. While I liked the 10th Kingdom solution to this riddle, it doesn't go that way here. She winds up confusing herself and them, then believes she's solved the riddle. Passing through the door, the floor immediately disappears from under her feet, and she's dumped into what's called an oubliette, where Hoggle is waiting for her. Unknown to her, he's been sent by Jareth to lead her back to the beginning of the labyrinth, thinking she'll be frustrated into quitting. Her kindness and an offer of friendship, and perhaps a little bribery, convinces Hoggle to help her get as far as she can. So he shows her how to escape the oubliette into the tunnels beneath the labyrinth. There's a few interesting visuals to interact with before the two run directly into Jareth himself. He reveals that Hoggle is not to be trusted by openly discussing his plans with him, and Hoggle does his best to smooth matters over before he's threatened with banishment to a place called the Bog of Eternal Stench, which we'll get to later. When Sarah brags that she's doing well, Jareth ups the stakes by moving the clock forward several hours, then leaves them, summoning what Hoggle refers to as the Cleaners, a huge contraption that takes up the whole tunnel, filled with lots of sharp spikes and deadly bits that just picks up every bit of debris in its path, including people, if you're unlucky. Hoggle and Sarah completely forget they're at an intersection and they can go back the way they came, and they run away from it. They reach safety, climbing out of the tunnels to the world above, and in this time Hoggle explains that he's a coward and he's afraid of Jareth especially. He explains he only said he was going to lure her back to the beginning to throw him off the scent. After they reach daylight, Hoggle runs away from Sarah when he hears the roars of a monster. Sarah comes to find that a Yeti is being held and tortured by a group of goblins. Every time it cries out, rocks seem to roll within her reach, and she uses them as thrown weapons to make the goblins scatter. Unafraid, she calms the beast down and learns his name is Ludo. She frees him and they continue on together, but their time is very short, lasting through another door riddle, this time with uncooperative door knockers. They pass into a forest where childlike Ludo is afraid, apparently with good reason, because through the magic of trap doors, he disappears when Sarah's back is turned, leaving her alone again. Somewhere not too far away, Hoggle hears her calling for help, but he's stalked by Jareth, who seems to only be there to try to further fray whatever affection Hoggle has for the girl. He insists that Hoggle's too ugly for her to be friends with him, then orders him to give her a present, a seemingly harmless peach. When Hoggle insists he won't do anything to hurt her, Jareth threatens him with the bog again, then tells him before departing that he'll send him there anyway if Sarah ever kisses him. Around this time, the Fireys make their appearance, with Sarah. Strange orange creatures who can remove and mix and match body parts, including their own heads at will. They're purely there to have a good time and mostly scare the hell out of Sarah. Their role in the book is a little more expanded, with their revelries eventually frightening and frustrating Sarah to tears, and they feel guilty, offering to help her find her brother, despite they have no idea what a castle or a brother is. They also don't understand why her head doesn't come off like theirs does. She tires of their antics and unhelpfulness, and resorts to what we see in the movie at the end of the musical number. She starts grabbing heads and throwing them. Hoggle appears to help her escape from them when they give chase. Hoggle is kissed by Sarah as a way to thank him, and this opens the floor beneath them and dumps them into the Bog of Eternal Stench, where there's really no way to describe this place without saying it's a swamp of anuses, because that's exactly what it is. Choruses of farts abound. Our heroes manage not to fall in, but here they find this is where Ludo has been left as well. Hoggle warns them they can't get their feet wet or the smell will stay with them forever. Here we encounter their final party member, guarding the bridge out of the bog. Sir Didymus is a small, fox-dog-like knight, who speaks and acts in a sort of Don Quixote sort of manner, whose mighty steed is a sheepdog. He engages in battle with Ludo until bested, bonding with him, and 4 times still refuses to let them cross, speaking of his sworn duty until Sarah finally asks him specifically what he swore. He answers that no one may cross without his permission, which he grants at her asking. The bridge, however, collapses with Sarah on it, and she's left dangling by a tree over the bog. Ludo begins howling, which summons boulders from the deep for Sarah to stand on, so she will not fall in. They cross and continue on their way, but when Sarah begins to grow tired and hungry, Hoggle at last offers her the peach, realizing with regret as soon as she bites into it that he's just poisoned her. He flees in shame. Sarah drifts away from the group, and through a flying crystal ball that entrances her, she's transported inside it, wherein a masquerade ball is going on. This is an opening for another David Bowie number, where he unmasks and dances with her, dressed as a princess. The book again goes into more detail on this, setting up the ball as very adult, and something Sarah's uncomfortably aware of, seeing signs around every corner that she's not supposed to be there, and despite the huge dress she's wearing, feeling naked because everyone is staring at her. Strange men in masks even try to lure her into dark corners, and she eventually gravitates toward Jareth because everything there is telling her he is the only safe thing in the room. The scene is interrupted by the clock striking, and Sarah's awakened from her trance. She tries to flee, only to realize she's still in the crystal ball, so she grabs a chair and breaks the wall, which sends her falling into a junkyard just outside the Goblin City. A goblin woman nearly tricks her into believing she's been sent home, and we have this disturbing moment where Sarah, entranced by her old toys, some of which she lost a long time ago, starts to forget what she's supposed to be doing. The scene is creepy and really interesting. The old woman is carrying all of her belongings on her back in an enormous pile, and slowly as she hands Sarah more and more things, the more Sarah begins to resemble the woman, obsessed with her knickknacks and symbols of her rapidly diminishing childhood. Sarah comes to her senses and reunites with her friends. They descend at last into the Goblin City, wherein 2 battles take place, the first with a giant axe-wielding robot. Hoggle returns to turn the tide, and Sarah forgives him for the peach. In the city itself, the entire goblin horde descends on them, which probably sounds more intimidating than it actually is. Ludo uses his rock summoning powers and drowns the entire city in an avalanche. When it comes time to face the Goblin King, Sarah insists she must do it alone and that she'll call for her friends if she needs them. What she finds in the castle is a vast chamber of staircases to nowhere, inspired by the M.C. Escher staircases. While Jareth tries to convince her in song to put her off her path, she chases her little brother over the chamber where she can, but it seems like every time she makes headway, he's moved to some part of the room she can't physically reach. At last she takes a great leap that will either kill her or bring her to him, and the room breaks apart. She drifts to the floor unharmed, but with her brother nowhere in sight. Jareth tries one last time to delay her, promising her everything and insisting he created this entire adventure to make her happy. Sarah begins to recite the monologue from her play, something that appears to unsettle him. She forgets the final lines again, but when she at last speaks them, declaring that Jareth has no power over her, the clock strikes the 13th hour, and Jareth's magic breaks apart, transforming him back into an owl and transporting Sarah and her brother home. In Sarah's bedroom, she sees images of her friends in her vanity mirror, and she begins to take down pictures and newspaper clippings of her mother. They say their goodbyes, but she says she misses them and needs them. So they, and a number of goblins she had contentious times with, appear in her bedroom and begin to celebrate her victory, as a familiar barn owl watches from outside before flying away into the dark. The first thing I tried to do in approaching this movie from a pagan perspective was to take down as many correspondences as I could find. This wound up being an interesting experience in itself, because the movie has its own. Every object or character that Sarah encounters in this movie is referenced by something in her bedroom, including the Goblin King himself, giving the whole story a sort of Wizard of Oz flavor to it. It's especially noteworthy that Jareth, as shown in photographs on her mirror, is a version of her mother's boyfriend, who in the book we learn has been inappropriately hitting on her, and Sarah doesn't seem to have a clear idea about how she feels about that. He also resembles an action figure or doll on her shelf, so he's likely a mashup of the two. This makes the masquerade scenes more meaningful and uncomfortable, and kind of contradicts the argument that the relationship between Sarah and Jareth is in any way romantic or appropriate. Overall, though, the visuals of the Labyrinth present in Sarah's bedroom was something I took as a pagan to be a fair representation of how solitaries especially build their mystical knowledge from what they know and learn, and that our perceptions of the other planes, if we care to look, may be informed by what we see in our day-to-day lives on a subconscious level. But let's look at some individual recurring images within the film itself. The first things we even see are CG representations of the Labyrinth and Jareth as the barn owl. Across many cultures, the Labyrinth is a representation of meditation, of the inner workings of the mind, but also in some cultures a passage into the other world. We do in some ways find this in the movie. The fact that many of Sarah's challenges are based on riddles and direct attacks on her psyche illustrates this quite well. And the Labyrinth itself is the other world, with its center being the most fractal and confusing of all locations. In rural churches, I've come across labyrinths as well. Circular puzzles that one follows at its center while praying or contemplating their spiritual work. We can also choose to view this as representing our slow descent into trance during path working. The deeper we descend, the deeper into the other plane we can go. The barn owl comes with a mixture of meanings because it means something different in different cultures. While the owls in general are symbols of wisdom, and the barn owl is frequently depicted alongside deities like Athena or Artemis, the barn owl in particular is a symbol of death. According to George Knowles on his site controversial.com, I may be mispronouncing that, they are regarded in Japan as demonic, and in Tangiers they're clairvoyants of the devil. Their ties to the other world, however, make it a fitting form for the Goblin King to take. Dogs are also of particular interest in this movie, from Sarah's pet named Merlin to Sir Didymus and his steed Ambrosius. They are viewed in a positive light, Merlin serving as Sarah's warning that she's late for the plot at the beginning of the movie, with Sir Didymus and company representing dogs as gallant and heroic creatures. This makes sense because dogs in general are an enduring symbol of protection and loyalty. The color orange is repeated throughout the movie. It's in the settings, you can see it in costume pieces like Hoggle's vest or Ludo's fur or the Fireys themselves, and even in the stripes on Toby's onesie. The color has a number of meanings, and the movie represents many of them in some form. It evokes fun, something we especially see in the Fireys, who exist only to have fun. However, it is also used in spell work related to kindness or legal problems, among many other things. Kindness is the way in which Sarah makes her friendships in this movie, and this whole conflict started with a spoken contract. The peach was an interesting visual. According to Mom's a Witch, a practical magic blog, the peach is a fruit eaten to induce love and gain wisdom. I found this to be of particular interest simply because of how the peach is used in the movie as a trap for Sarah to overcome. However, it does put her in direct contact with Jareth in the masquerade scene and leaves Sarah to confront some very complicated feelings that are at least somewhat related to things going on in her real life. Since she ultimately chooses to escape from that fantasy, one has to wonder if the peach wound up doing its job then. There are a number of themes in this story to be addressed as well, but I feel like I would be remiss if I didn't spend at least a minute talking about the goblins themselves as representations of the denizens of the other world. In this particular story, at least the earlier stages of it, it's implied, as I said before, that the goblins were all at one point stolen children. This sort of makes sense when you look at them, because their amusements are childish in nature, and a lot of them are mean-spirited, but largely unaggressive and easily distracted, at the worst, with the best of them being well-intentioned but irresponsible. In many depictions of the Fae in folklore, this is a fairly accurate description of them overall. Some are playful and even helpful when treated with respect, while others are tricksy and even downright hostile to human beings. The other world in this movie is the Labyrinth itself, with its denizens housed within its walls in some shape or form, living their lives as they do. Time moves strangely, as the other world is said to do, with Sarah returning home after 13 hours only to find that no time has really gone by at all. This location in general seems to follow a number of thematic rules that resonated with me. The first of these elements is the importance of spoken word and being taken at your word. The goblins waiting in Toby's toy box cannot do anything until Sarah calls on them specifically. Hoggle will not help her get into the labyrinth until she specifically asks him to help her. She misses a shortcut because she doesn't ask the right questions. Jareth makes Sarah's journey harder in a moment of bravado. She says it's too easy. They can only cross the bridge by asking permission. You have to be literal and direct in this world to get anything done. Sarah only begins to be more thoughtful in her words and actions over time. This culminating in her encounter with Sir Didymus, where she finally does ask the right questions and therefore is pointed to a simple, almost too simple, solution. Much in the same way, we must be careful in our own contemplations and be specific in our workings, because Mysterious Ways doesn't even begin to cover everything we can come into contact with when we're not careful. Another major theme is the issue of consent. Sarah feels trapped in her own home because her role as babysitter is an assumed one by her parents. The book's allusions to her mother's boyfriend's behavior also skirts this issue, because she's a minor who can't consent to his advances, and he's in a position of power. Her triumph over Jareth in the crystal ball is a clear symbol of her taking her power and agency back. Reportedly, there was supposed to be a kiss during this scene, and David Bowie flat refused to have any part of it because Jennifer Connelly was a minor, and that is unacceptable. The mystical aspect of consent here is that the goblins and Jareth himself cannot do anything to Sarah or Toby without explicit permission. I wish the goblins would come and take you away right now was in their eyes a contract. Now, Sarah insists she didn't mean it, and she obviously didn't. It was said in a moment of frustration and anger on the assumption that all she would really be doing was blowing off steam. Any of us could guess that. Nothing Jareth does would hold up in court, but we're working on otherworldly logic here. And when we're talking about otherworldly logic, as we've already discussed, you have to be careful what you say. Be careful what you wish for comes to mind. By agreeing to Jareth's terms, Sarah consents to face the dangers of the labyrinth, and in the end, her declaration that he has no power over her is her retracting that consent, sending her and Toby back home. The magic in this setting is bound by this. In our own work, we must remember how and when we give permission for anything to enter our lives, whether it's through the use of circles, shielding, or other methods. We're cautioned to be careful who we talk to and what we permit. This is part of that. The final theme I'd like to talk about is the use of ritual and reenactment within the story, which is a small part but still significant, and it works in two ways, in how it can be harmful and then how it can be beneficial. The first way in which we see this, perhaps more in the book than the movie, is through Jareth. It is implied that Toby is not the first child that Jareth has taken from someone. There are passages that go into his mindset as well as that of the goblins, who have no memory of their former lives and are happy to carry on doing what they do, no matter how repetitive, because it's the way things are and they are content. Jareth, on the other hand, is described as being caught in a loop that he can't break. He is a bored, lonely king who hates his subjects because they cannot really interact with each other in a meaningful way. They're too ignorant and easily distracted, and he is too smart, adult, and present within himself to identify with them at all. He tells himself that Toby may be different and that in time he may grow to be somebody he can have conversations with, but the book also suggests this is not the first time he's thought this, that whatever his repetitive hopes are for a companion, it will always end the same, with him alone and his subjects oblivious. He goes through the motions because he feels he must, and because it's what makes this whole world work. It is not said whether Sarah is the first to challenge the labyrinth, but if we do assume that, especially given Jareth's enthusiasm to continue the game, then Sarah's triumph at the end of the story does indeed break the cycle. A harmful one, but a cycle nonetheless. The final way this theme works is through Sarah. The narrative is bookended by Sarah's use of the play and the ending monologue. It's something she's passionate about, even play acting the scenes in costume. In using this familiar, important thing for her, she is able to break Jareth's power and escape the labyrinth. Many pagan rituals are about repeated words and reenactments in some shape or form, whether we're reflecting the cycles of the moon or the seasons, the dealings of the deities. We are representing those phases and actions symbolically. Liturgical drama is a key element in many religions, and we see a version of it here. Drama is not Sarah's religion, but it is her passion. It is something she has faith in about herself. It works because she believes in it. She believes in herself, and anyone who's done a casting knows how important this is. It is through all of these that we can take this story, which is not wholly geared toward us as an audience, and still read it through pagan eyes. There are lots of other symbols in the movie you could toy with as well. I didn't mention all of them here. Did any others catch your eye? Leave them in the comments. As always, thank you for joining me this week. If you like what you heard, please subscribe, comment, and share, and I'll talk to you soon.